Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to the elders, past and present, of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Zong from Australia Tibet Council, and it is my great honor to present tonight's Tibet Talk series featuring a very special speaker. You have seen or heard him in the radio or on TV or in the papers over the past few days. And tonight you will hear more from him. Some of you might have met him back in 2008 as a scholar from Harvard University. He visited Australia to facilitate a workshop for a group of young Tibetans and Chinese. Much has changed in the Tibetan world and in Dr. Lobsang Sangay's world and own life since then. I had the good fortune of traveling with Kalon Tripa, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, over the last few days to Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney, where he's been speaking to sold-out audiences at a public talk or at the think tank or at the National Press Club. Kalon Tripa was also in Parliament House the past few days during one of the most chaotic periods, as you have seen. Nonetheless, close to 40 parliamentarians met with Kalon Tripa and engaged in very robust discussions. 4 MPs have made public statements on Tibet in the Parliament the last 2 days. This was his first visit to Australia after taking the office of Kalon Tripa, the political head of the Tibetan Burman exile. As we are all aware, His Holiness the Dalai Lama handed over his political authority to the democratically elected leadership in exile last year, thereby his vision of setting up a democratic Tibetan society and ensuring the resilience of our struggle. Dr. Sangay is the man Tibetans have elected as the Dalai Lama's political successor. Dr. Sangay was born in a Tibetan refugee settlement in northern India and went on to become the first Tibetan to receive a doctorate from Harvard Law School in 2004. And today he is here as the political leader of the Tibetan people. For the last 5 decades, exiled Tibetans have responded to the continuing occupation of their homeland by embracing the democratic values of the free world, investing in education for Tibet's new generation, and remaining deeply committed to our cause. In Dr. Lobsang Sangay, we are seeing the living example of the enormous task accomplished by His Holiness and the Tibetans over the last 50 years. I'm sure Kalon Tripa, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, will speak on all this and more. He will speak for around 20 minutes and we'll be happy to take lots of questions afterwards. Kalon Tripa, we are broadcasting your talk live on the internet. For thousands of Tibet supporters across Australia and beyond. A few days ago, we did an online poll where we asked our members to vote on the most popular questions and to submit their own questions. I will put some of them to you afterwards. You may also like to make your comments or ask questions on Twitter tonight, so please use the hashtag Tibet Talks, that's just Tibet Talks in one word. And remember to put your mobiles on silence mode. So please join me now in welcoming Kalon Tripa, Dr. Lobsang Sangay on stage.
I decided to take a shortcut. a lot of equipments here, which I'll do without. Thank you very much for coming here this evening. I know it's Friday. Normally, people choose to go to movies and have a good time, then listen to a boring speech from someone, who has come from Dharamsala. I'm not an entertainer, so if you expect you to laugh at my jokes, then you should ask for refund right away. But I'll inform you something about Tibet. As for the topic, democracy, Buddhism, and the future of Asia, democracy I know a little bit about. Buddhism I don't know much about. Because when after I took over, in September last year, there was a major gathering of very prominent lamas in Dharamsala, and I happened to have audience with His Holiness and informed to him that so many prominent lamas are in Dharamsala. The Tibetan administration had called the meeting, and what to do. They said, well, you don't know about Buddhism, so you just accept that, and then you have political responsibility. Inform the lamas about political responsibility and the situation in Tibet. So I'm certified by His Holiness not to know about Dharma, not to speak about Dharma. So there will be no blessings or money as such. But I'll share the Buddhist element or Buddhist experience perhaps in the Tibetan lecture a little later. As for the future of Asia, I think it's in your hands. Collectively, we could do something about it. Now, as far as democracy or Tibetan democracy is concerned, it all started when His Holiness was very young. He often shared these anecdotes. You might have heard or read that first he went to China in 1954 and attended the National People's Congress. And he could see people by his side, both sides. Some Communist Party members slept through the whole session, except when they had to vote. And when they voted, raised their hands in unanimity. All of them raised their hands for whatever the resolution was. So he felt that was not that democratic, because you slip through the session, you don't listen to what people are saying, and when it comes to voting, you raise your hands and unanimously approve the legislation. So in 1956, he went to India, and he found the Indian parliamentary system and the proceeding very entertaining, and because there were members of the Indian Parliament debating heatedly, robustly, and in fact, His Holiness noticed that the Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the father of India, was heatedly criticized by members of the opposition. And he felt, yeah, this is the democracy, he would like to see in the future. Then he had returned to India, and in 1959, when he had to flee along with 80,000 Tibetans, which included my parents and many of our parents. So in India, the first thing he did was in 1960, the winter of 59. He said, we ought to have Tibetan democracy. First, Tibetans must elect their own members of the parliament. And Tibetans looked around and said, how can we elect a member of parliament when we have just arrived or fled from Tibet? And many of them were road builders, But then there was His Holiness vision, and they went and they discussed among themselves and said, okay, who will be the member of parliament? Raise your hands. So they started raising their hands. Hardly any involvement from the female population or from the youth population. It was mainly male. And they elected 13 members of the parliament. Then in 1963, female or the woman representation were also mandated by His Holiness and thereafter elected by Tibetans. So we had women representation very early on in the Tibetan community in exile. In 1963, and he also asked for, which became controversial, in fact refused by Tibetans for some time, but nonetheless His Holiness wish prevailed. The constitution of Tibet was drafted, and in which there was a provision for the removal or the impeachment of the Dalai Lama. So when this provision was distributed and discussed in the society, it became scandalous, because who would have thought that anyone could remove His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we had just lost our country. And he was 26 years old, but he had the vision of for secular democratic society, and he wanted a provision in the constitution. And in fact, two of the people who translated from the English to Tibetan, Nakila and the other guy, Sandu Rinjila, they got very, very vehemently criticized by Tibetans. How can you put a provision in the constitution which calls for impeachment of the Dalai Lama? Maybe you are a communist mole from China. That's why you are doing all these things. Because for us, His Holiness is a spiritual leader. His vote is our decree. We carry that. But nonetheless, His Holiness insisted there was an impeachment provision in the constitution of the Tibetan, in the constitution as early as 1963. Then straightforward, introduced several reforms, expanded the parliament, and in 1991, Tibetan constitution became Tibetan charter because we had introduced several chapters calling for, adapted to the exile situation. So several chapters were included. And then in 2001, the first direct election of the Kalon Tripa took place, and His Holiness declared himself semi-retired. And no one believed it, actually. At least the majority didn't believe it, but His Holiness insisted, I'm semi-retired, We heard it a few times, but we thought His Holiness is still our spiritual and political leader. He can't retire. He's our leader. He should lead us to the end. That was the Tibetan mindset. And then the election for the Kalon Tripa, for this Kalon Tripa, began, and then interesting things happened. Now I'll give you, maybe because it's Friday night, but perhaps you're looking for some entertainment, I'll try to give you some lighter version of Tibetan democracy and my experience. So how it all began? It began in a restaurant called Meglo Restaurant in Dharamsala. I'm sure some of you have been there, with a glass of beer in my hand and Thupten Samdula's hand. And Thupten Samdula said, I have a great idea, and I already talked to Samduru Buche and others. They all approved this idea because he was sharing with me that the next Kalon Tripa election will be the most important election because His Holiness is 75. So by the time election takes place, he'll be 76, and by the time 2 terms of the Kalon Tripa ends, he will be His Holiness will be 86. So this is the most important Kalon Tripa election, and he has a brilliant idea to Tibetans never actually volunteer, engage or participate in election or politics generally. So he wants to introduce reform, and he wants to launch a website called kalontripa.org. In that website, the Kalon Tripa will be nominated, the candidates for Kalon Tripa will be nominated by Tibetans all over the world, and all you need is 25 Tibetans to nominate a candidate. And then first there will be online version of election, then real version, so that you can prepare early on. And I looked at him and I said, you know what, this idea is really good, but it's not going to work in the Tibetan community, because in the Tibetan community no one volunteers. We have to be called in, dragged in to be someone, to be something. And then he was absolutely certain, so passionate about it. And I said, what happens if you don't get any volunteers? Then he looked around, he was absolutely certain he'll get volunteers. And in the end, I took pity on him and I said, look, if you don't get any volunteers, I will be your default or dummy candidate in the website. Then the real ones will come, and then I will withdraw, and you go with the real ones, then election will take place. Okay? So that was the deal. And he said, okay. And after a few months, with grand ceremony, he launched the website, kalontripa.org. And he was everywhere in Tibetan news media, on television, on radio, on websites. Alhamdulillah has come up with this brilliant idea with kalontripa.org. Now, Kalon Tripa candidates are going to come. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Later I got a report saying that he was almost under depression, drinking too much. And then I also quietly disappeared because I remembered my promise, to be the dummy candidate. I said, oh, this is it. Even I couldn't vote. So one fine day, a friend of mine called Dr. St. visited him in Montreal and saw him depressed, drinking too much, you know. So his tummy was bulging out, so to speak. I'm dramatizing a bit. I'm giving you the movie version of how it happened. But all this was generally true. Then over a couple of years again, Dr. St., my friend, and took us something like what this brilliant idea. Brilliant idea was a few days later, I got a call from Dr. St. Hey, Lobsang, how are you? I'm fine. Did you check kalontripa.org? No, I didn't check. Yes, I remember checking it, but there's no one. There's nothing going on. Why don't you check? Sure, I said. What's going on? Why don't you check? I said, wow, my picture was there and my bio was there. I said, how did it come here? I never nominated myself. I was modeling something, and he said, no, I nominated you. Now you are my official Kalon Tripa candidate. I said, how dare you do that? I mean, this is too much. And then I was a bit anxious, and I looked very closely and found that the picture in the website, you can find it even today, was me with a t-shirt on. I said, how can you do that? You are nominating a candidate for Kalon Tripa. And how can you put my picture with a t-shirt? That's almost like a disrespect to the position, at least to not put myself. And then I checked the bio. Bio was also old one, quite old. Why did you put an old bio? Why didn't you put a new one? Hey, I have a good idea. I have a good suggestion. He called and he said, well, what's the good suggestion? Why don't you put a new picture and a new bio? That amounts to myself nominating as a candidate. You know? I said, I'm not going to do that. I am not going to do that. But then the problem is no one knew how all this unfolded. Tibetans around the world say, kalontripa.org has a candidate. Lobsang Sangay is the candidate. I started getting calls. Hey, you are the candidate. You are the candidate. I said, no. There's some mistake here. Then the most embarrassing thing was, no one was endorsing me. You need 25 people to endorse you. Then you become a candidate. And I said, no one's endorsing. I called STA. Dr. ST, do you see? Now, no one is endorsing me. I'm embarrassed. I'm supposed to be, quote unquote, a dummy candidate and no endorsement at all. So I have a solution for that. Next day I checked, his father-in-law endorsed me. Is that your solution? That is mother, that is wife, that is uncle. I said, this looks like nepotism here, you see. My goodness, this is not democratic. And finally, after a few days, someone in Alaska nominated me. I'm assuming, even today I don't know him, I'm assuming that to be an authentic endorsement. I don't know. Someone, Pardon? No, his brother. Her brother. Yes. So, they nominated me and endorsed me. Then finally, I got 25 nominations. Lo and behold, then the next candidate came. Serious one, real one. All came. I said, it's working. I'm the dummy candidate. I have to withdraw sometime. So, but then, websites after websites started nominating candidates. Individuals started having their own websites. They also started nominating candidates. Then organizations started nominating candidates. Newspapers started endorsing candidates. Almost all of them, my name was there first. Why? Because I was the default candidate, right? And everybody thought I was standing for the election. And, okay, let's have candidates. Lobsang Sangay, Lobsang Sangay. Then started getting into my head as well. I said, hey, everybody's endorsing me, Organizations, websites, radio, they are talking. And I said, maybe I should explore this. Maybe take it a little further. Then from a dummy candidate, I was becoming a little serious. Then I called my friend, a good friend. Obviously, at this time of crisis or need, you call your good friends. And my good friend said, are you serious? I said, yes. Then what you need is a graceful exit strategy. And I said, why? Look at other candidates. Former Kalon Tripa, Speaker of the Parliament, Deputy Speaker, most seasoned diplomat, Private Secretary of His Holiness Dalai Lama, and you want to be Kalon Tripa, good luck to you. So what you really need if you want to run is a graceful exit strategy, so that as soon as you enter, you can quickly get out. Okay, that was an encouragement, Then I called my other friend. Other friends, are you serious? Yes, give me 2 days. Okay, I'll call all my friends in Dharamsala. and Washington, D.C. Then he reported to me saying, none of them are voting for you. So you get a clue. Oh my goodness, what an encouragement. So none of your friends are voting for me? Yes, you are my friend, they all know. None of my friends are voting for you. So, good luck. Then I called my third friend. I complained bitterly. And he said, Lobsang, I think you should run. I said, why? I thought there was a good news. You have nothing to lose, so go for it. So that was the encouragement, you know. So with that encouragement, I went for it, because I had nothing to lose. But then all along, during Tibetan elections or the parliamentary elections, I've kind of criticized the election process by saying, you know, what we need is real debates among candidates. Candidates should travel to the people and, you know, ask for votes and all that. I've criticized before. So then I thought, least I could do is, you know, buy my own votes and go to the people and see what happens. So then I went from one settlement to another settlement. The turnout was huge. They all were curious. Who's this guy here trying to talk to us about election and all that? And then I thought, you know, I better be careful, because the conventional wisdom was the other guy was going to win 90% of the people. As I told you, even my friends thought I was crazy. So with that conventional wisdom as the backdrop, I said, you know, I have formulated a mechanism through which I could run, you know, and then come out at least respectful. So my formula is this: how can I campaign without campaigning? Ask for votes without saying, so that I win even if I lose. Which means I go to the people, obviously, but that was not a campaign. I'm going to give workshops on the state of the Tibetan movement. You see? How can I ask for votes without saying? So if I say, give me votes, Tibetan, so you are cheap, get away, you know. So I said, these are my ideas about the where Tibetan movement is, and if you like it, keep it in your mind. If you don't, please throw it away, and I'm out of here. And then, so that I will win even if I lose, meaning I will remain Tibetan with humility, Buddhism, respectful of elders, even if I lose the election. So lose, I was certain. At least the conventional wisdom told me I was going to lose anyways. So that's the formulation, and I went about traveling to all the different places, because part, again here, a little bit theory part is this. Tibetan issue is part movement, it's an exile movement, part democratic governance. Now, ideologically or theoretically, they are contradictory. Meaning, if it's an exile movement, what you emphasize is unity, single leadership, single voice, because it's a movement, right? And you want single leader, single voice. But if it's a democratic system, what you emphasize is, instead of unity, diversity. Instead of single leadership, opposition parties. Instead of single voice, freedom of speech. So there are fundamental contradictions between the two. And the exile administration or community is trying to blend the two and make these contradictions into a one. Hence here, perhaps the Buddhist notion of dialectics and middle path, devoid of extremes, all helps. How can we find a middle way for everything? So Tibetan model, in fact, is it's a lab test for democracy in exile. That is why it's not surprising. Almost all the exiled governments, movements, communities have not been democratic before. At least not the way the democratic system that we have, with judiciary, with executive, with legislature. So why there was always a contradiction? We always need one leader, one voice, and unity. But we are trying to combine the two. So in that sense, it's a very important model for many marginalized groups and many refugee groups around the world. Because if we succeed, then this model can be adopted and adapted to other marginalized groups and to other refugee groups around the world. Because our delivery mechanism also, our administrative system through which the distributive mechanism for welfare projects is also very efficient and effective. We just take 4% of any foreign aid we get, and we distribute 96% to the people. So this is a very effective one. So this could be adapted by other refugee communities around the world. But leave that aside. Now, so Tibetans, we have invested in democracy and non-violence for the last many decades. And we are serious on this. As I mentioned, His Holiness had this vision of secular democracy society. In 50s and 60s on, we have been investing it, maturing, and now our democracy system is very much consolidated. And that's the technical term. This story is not much known. When His Holiness was both spiritual and political leader, people thought generally, oh, in Dharamsala there is His Holiness Dalai Lama and a few monks who were governing the Tibetan community, and that's how our movement was led. But the democracy system, has been there for the last 50 years, and it has matured and grown. How serious or how engaged Tibetans are in Tibetan democracy. From Alaska to Australia, everybody had to vote on single day. Wherever you are, Tibetans are scattered in 40 plus countries. If you don't vote on that single day, your votes will be invalid. In fact, one president of the Tibetan community had a different idea. He said, Saturday I could not take off, so I can take off only on Sunday. Let's have election on Sunday. And they had, and they sent the result, and the Dharamsala Election Commissioner said, no, you're wrong, invalid. And he was blamed, and later I believe he lost the next round of election. So you can't adjust the election according to your holidays. Also, you have to vote on that day. Tibetans in Ladakh, the border of Tibet, on March 20th, it was minus 40 degrees Celsius. Still, the local election officials took the ballot boxes on the backs of the yaks and donkeys and climbed the mountains for days. Went to mountain tops and got the nomads come down from their tents and then voted minus 40 degrees. And in Bandra, let's say, is one of the hottest actually Tibetan settlements in Chhattisgarh. Yes, Tibetan lined up to vote on the election day. So, it was not with the central AC room where people could sit and vote. It was outside the school building, but still they stood in line and voted. So the participation was everywhere. The discussion was everywhere. And obviously along with it, a criticism, comparatively a mild criticism of all the candidates. And criticisms about me are, now I can say perhaps it's valid, then I refuse to acknowledge the criticism. I was the youngest, untested, some say arrogant, incapable, never worked in Dharamsala, so I was parachuting from nowhere, from 16 years in America and Harvard, and just going there to take over the political leadership. In fact, a friend of mine, as I was campaigning around, looked at me one day. He was a Tibetan administration official. Looked at me one day, Lobsang. I said, what were you thinking when you decided to run for the election? I said, why? You have never worked in Dharamsala for a single day, not even as a bureaucrat, not even as a volunteer, not even as a member of parliament, not even as a colonist or a minister. You were going straight to the top. What were you thinking? How can you think like that? I said, well, the story is long. The default candidate, all those, it's a long story. So I got overwhelming votes in the preliminary round in October and also in the final round on March 20th. Now, two stories. Bit interesting. So, a little bit of Buddhism element. I don't know much of Buddhism. Perhaps this is the Buddhist element of Tibetan democracy. We had a debate in Dharamsala between me and other candidates. Next day, our debate was in Delhi. So we looked at each other and said, what do? We have to take a taxi ride to Delhi. So other candidate, he was finally the runners-up, a good friend of mine, Tenzin Tadonla. We looked at each other and said, okay, let's share the taxi. And the organizer also, hopped in the same taxi. So two organizers, two candidates, sharing taxi, 12 hours ride. Bumpy roads of Dharamsala, if you have been through. And then, after 6-7 hours, obviously, no matter how much we control, it goes off. In between, we managed to open our eyes and didn't line. Both of us looked at each other because we were horrified. Because the taxi driver was really driving through, whether it's red light or green light. He was just driving through the highways of India. Oh my goodness, what is going on? And we started talking to him. And he cared less what we were saying because he wanted to reach Delhi very fast. Then we said we have to keep awake, we don't want to. The candidates were disappeared in the highways of Punjab. But then after some time we just again dozed off, and finally we were having very peaceful sleep. We just got up and found that he had stopped the taxi on the side of the highway while all the trucks and the buses were passing by, He had stopped the car right next to the highway. I said, why? He got tired, obviously. He also was sleeping driver. Oh my goodness. And then, we all looked at each other, but actually it's good he gets some sleep. And after some time, obviously, after 7, 8, 9 hours of bumpy roads in India, your back itches, everything itches. But after we started nudging him, put some cold water on his face, and he got up and he said, now let's carry forward. And then we drove through, and finally we reached in Delhi, Majduga Tila, some of you know, at 2 a.m. or so. Then we looked around, no hotel rooms, and 2 organizers started banging doors, and finally one hotel manager opened. Said, oh, we need rooms. Yes, we have 2 rooms. Okay, 2 organizers stayed in 1 room. The other room was me and the other candidates, So, Tibetan politicians, we share rooms too. We share rooms. And next morning we had breakfast together. Then good debate. Then good lunch. Then good goodbyes. And then camping tips. Hey, Bhatta, which are the areas did you go to? I went to the south, I went to the north. Oh, yeah, that area. Oh, I took 17 hours for me. I'll tell you a shortcut. We can get you there 13 hours, And then, I'll ask my volunteer to help you organize camping event as well. Oh, yeah, thank you very much, So, that was a Buddhist kind of element, So, I just share this with some of the politicians I met here. In Australia, perhaps they will start sharing taxes as well. And then, obviously, all along when I ran for the election, I thought I was going to Dharamsala to serve His Holiness the Dalai Lama, obviously, right? And that would also make my job a little easier, because, you get elected and you make decisions, and you go to His Holiness and seek his endorsement. Once His Holiness endorses it by signing, that's what we used to do before. Sign the decision, and you go to Tibetan people and say, by the way, decision is made and signed by His Holiness Dalai Lama, which is fully endorsed. No criticism, please. If you criticize, you might go to hell, because it's the Lama, see? So that could have given me the shield, the protection from criticism, but His Holiness had a different idea. On March 10th, the national address, and I was sitting at the back end of the podium, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, I hereby give up all my political authority to whoever gets elected next. Lose my balance. That's hell of a job now. You say, but that shit is gone now, And normally, I'm sure in Australian politics too, you can give family reasons to withdraw. My daughter is too young, my wife is sick, something like that. But as I told you, it's part movement and part democratic governance. Democratic governance, you can withdraw, give family reasons. But it's part movement. You can't. That's like betraying your cause. You are a Tibetan. You are supposed to take ownership of the movement and lead. And if I say I withdraw, then Tibetans will say, why did you run in the first place? Number 2, you're betraying our cause. What kind of example you're setting? What kind of example you're sending to China? That you can't stand up to them. What kind of message you're sending to Tibet? That's too much to think about. But then, major challenges. Obviously, it's not a difficult job. Now it's made much more difficult. But I thought to myself, I am a Tibetan. I have to take the ownership. It is His Holiness' vision to have secular democratic society, and His Holiness' expectation the Tibetan people lead their own movement moving forward. For 60 years, His Holiness led us by holding our hand, actually. And now He wants to see whether you can walk or not, whether you can stand up or not, whether you can move forward or not. That was the test. And I told myself, this is my karma. This is my destiny, because I didn't plan it this way. I started unplanned, and then I can't explain any other way but accept this as my destiny. Because from where I began as a humble refugee family, like many who are sitting here, who are here, with an acre of land for our family, 2 cows, at most 3 cows, that's it, and a dozen or so chicken. So I used to spend my winter vacation going to the forest, cutting wood for home, cutting grass for cows. I have cleaned cow dung. I've helped my mother milk cows. And the school that I went to, Tibetan Refugee School in Darjeeling, where we are served lentil soup and rice every day for dinner. And the lunch we get is dumpling and curry. Curry is not that spicy or tasty as you eat in Indian restaurant, or the dumpling is not so white and soft as you eat in Chinese restaurant. It's dark and hard. When you throw it, it bounces high. One example that proves Newton's third law wrong. And when you bite those dumplings, along with the thread comes out, stone comes out, So you have to have pretty good sharp eyes, actually, to make sure you eat the bread and remove all the things that you don't want to. But sometimes some things go anyway. That hopefully helps our immune system with all the stones and the threads and that. So that's how all of us actually got an education. We worked very hard, went to Delhi University, got my BA, LLB, got Fulbright scholarship to go to Harvard Law School to do my master's. And then further scholarship I managed to get and pursued, did my doctorate in law, which I finished in 2004. And Harvard Law School gave me a job as a fellow, and then they thought I was doing okay and promoted me and gave me a senior fellow job. So I was in, kind of a relatively comfortable life, earning in dollars with central heating. And once or twice a week, I go to Starbucks, stretch my leg, and read New York Times and drink white chocolate mocha. No one bothers me. I don't bother anyone. So I used to lead my own vote. So it was relatively okay. Then Tibetans decided to vote for me. Now I had to leave America, Starbucks, Harvard. I substituted. Starbucks, I think, got substituted pretty well with Indian chai, sweet, tasty ones, masala chai. And central heating, still not yet. If you have been to Dharamsala, as we say in Dharamsala, in winter it's warmer outside the house than inside the house. You have to make do with sun heat, But then all this is not sacrifice. All this a contribution from our side. Not just me, the Department of Information and International Relations, Kalon, Bikila, she left a job as senior PR staff in $1 billion hospital center in Montreal and joined me to Dharamsala. Education Secretary Mudubla closed his shop. I think he's going to close his shop in San Francisco and came, joined me. And then a friend of mine also left a job in San Francisco, joined me. And then many volunteers are coming now, Tibetans from all over, to serve in Dharamsala, because ultimately Dharamsala is the center of the Tibetan cause, is the center of democratic governance, is the center of the Tibetan people. And we all have to take ownership. His Holiness has led us for so long. It's time, and that's what he wanted. And hence we all stepped up and we are stepping up. And we will lead the movement forward to continue the legacy of our elder generation, to continue the hard work and build on the hard work of the elder generation, to fulfill the aspirations of all those Tibetans who have died, who continue to sacrifice in Tibet. We will continue Tibetan movement forward as long as it takes, till freedom is restored for Tibetan people. That determination, that commitment, that confidence we Tibetans have. In that sense, we are sending a clear message to the Chinese government that we are here to stay as long as it takes. We are also sending a message of hope to Tibetans inside Tibet. We will be here as long as it takes for His Holiness Dalai Lama to return to Tibet, for Tibetans to have our basic freedom. The unjust that is taking place in Tibet ought to end, and we will work very hard to make it end. And as you all know, Tibetans inside Tibet are in very, very difficult situation. You might have read that 42 Tibetans have committed self-immolation, of which 35 have died. Now life is precious, very precious. Given a choice, we all want to live with our family members, with our parents, with our siblings. But Tibetans in Tibet have decided to give up their life so that the other Tibetans could have better life. 42 self-immolators all have, it's pretty clear that all of them have obviously committed a sad, a tragic experience, and many of them have died. But none of them have harmed anyone but themselves. Still, the government in Beijing refused to acknowledge that there is a problem in Tibet. They refused to solve the issue of Tibet, even though we are reasonable in the sense what Tibetans ask for is genuine autonomy within China, within the framework of the Chinese constitution. We are not challenging China's sovereignty. We are not challenging China's territorial integrity. Still, and Beijing, instead of responding positively, unfortunately, blame His Holiness Dalai Lama and Tibetans in exile. They call His Holiness Dalai Lama a demon. And they make Tibetans denounce His Holiness Dalai Lama by stamping on his photograph. That's why hundreds and thousands of monks flee and leave monasteries. And to the extent that even there are some protests inside Tibet, which happened, several protests took place in February of this year. 8 Tibetans were shot or dead. So because there is no space for any form of protest, demonstrations, rallies, hunger strike, Tibetans are taking the extreme measure in that sense. There is no space for freedom of speech. Hence Tibet is saying, if I participate in protest, likelihood that I get arrested, I get tortured, perhaps die is high. So might as well commit self-immolation. So these are really drastic and unfortunate decisions taken by Tibetans, and they are paying with their lives. So as a Tibetan, as a human being, you really don't want to see such tragic deaths. That is why Tibetan administration have appealed to Tibetans not to resort to drastic actions, including self-immolation, repeatedly. But still they continue to do so. As a Buddhist, you pray for them. That's what people are faith do. When someone passes away, you pray for them. And as a Tibetan, you show solidarity for the cause that they have died, and for the cries that they have died, which is they want to see return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet. What they want is basic freedom, like any human being. Australia is a land of opportunity. Australians have values like democracy, human rights, and freedom. These are the same values Tibetans aspire for. These are the values enshrined in the Australian Constitution. These are the values enshrined in the Chinese Constitution but not implemented. These are the values enshrined in our charter which we aspire. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has visited Australia several times, and he is again visiting in June of next year. And many of you will see him, hear him. That's what Tibetans in Tibet want. They all want to hear and see their own leader, which is denied to Tibetans inside Tibet. This is the state of Tibet, which is a sad state. In that sense, what happens to Tibet could be a sad or a positive commentary on Asia and the world. If you solve the issue of Tibet, it is a positive, a welcome commentary to the issue of Tibet and to Asia. And if the issue of Tibet is not solved and the suffering continues, it will be a sad commentary on the future of Asia as well. However, many people say the task I have taken, the Kasha has taken, and the Tibet cause is impossible, which I disagree actually. Before I took over this job, I knew it would be a difficult job. And after taking over, I realized that it's much more difficult than I expected. Still, my commitment and my determination, my team's commitment and determination for the cause remains the same, if not stronger. We will be there. Because why? This is the just thing to do. This is the right thing to do. And we want to make Tibet a land where there will be basic freedom. Now, often people say it's impossible. How can you say that? And I tell them, look at the Soviet Union. My father was an avid listener of radio, and he always listened to news. He always talked about the Soviet Union becoming the #1 in the world. Berlin Wall, where is it? Nelson Mandela got freed and democracy was restored in South Africa. During the Colour Revolution, democracy swept Eastern European countries. And during the Arab Spring, just a year and a half ago, who would have thought that there would be democracy in Arab countries? Now we have democracy in Arab countries. And who would have thought just 2 months ago Aung San Suu Kyi would be free? And then accepting a Nobel Peace Prize and traveling around. And on her birthday in London, he met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So who would have thought all this would have happened in the last 20, 30 years? It all happened, and it continues to happen, and it will happen to Tibet and Tibetan people also. With that belief, with that confidence, Tibetans are here to stay, and we will be here till freedom is restored for Tibetan people. Till then, we request all of you to be with us and make Tibet the best story of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalon. I'll now open the floor for questions. To start with, I'd like to ask the most popular question from our online poll. What role can Australia play in the resolution of the Tibet-China issue?
Test 1, 2. Yes, 1, 2.
Well, Australia can play a very important role because it is one of the major countries in Asia. First, you can sign up with the Australia Tibet Council or Tibet Information Office or Dalai Lama .inc, because if you subscribe to some organization, then you get information weekly or monthly basis, then you can get engaged. And obviously you can thank the government and leaders of Australia for all the support they have rendered on Tibetans, and also ask your local representatives that you care about Tibet. Unless the politicians hear from their constituents, they don't act. And you can call your representatives and say, I vote for you, but I would like you to support Tibet issue as well. That will go a long way. And remain engaged. And then if you want to help in some other forms, you can always contact our representative Sonam Nobu Thapula. He's our representative here in Canberra, in Australia. And through him, you can reach out to us in Dharamsala. But I just want to add a few things. That is, in Australia, it seems the debate seems to be kind of a zero-sum mindset. If Australian leaders meet with the His Holiness the Dalai Lama, then there will be a negative repercussion and on Australia, especially business interests. That we will suffer and China will cut us out and we will lose jobs. But empirically, that is not the case. For example, President Barack Obama met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama twice. The relationship between US and China continues. Recently, Prime Minister David Cameron and Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister of Great Britain, met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, along with Prince Charles, met with Aung San Suu Kyi, also met in England, and the relationship between Great Britain and China continued. And when His Holiness was in Canada, Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada, also met with His Holiness. And business continues. In fact, the President and Prime Minister of Poland also met. In fact, Baltic states also met with Angela Merkel of Germany, Sarkozy of France, all met with His Holiness, and the relationship with China continues. So, if His Holiness, when he comes in June, the Australian leaders meet with His Holiness, it's not going to impact. There might be cancellation of a few meetings, which normally tend to be. Even the Mongolian president, even though they are kind of dependent on China for the railway line to export their goods to the rest of the world, also met with His Holiness there. So it's really not a zero-sum. The zero-sum mindset is not necessary. I think that if Australians can convey to their elected leaders, will send a message. Because I'm often asked this by media and generally, what China is going to be, how should we deal with China? But what China is going to be will be partly determined by how world respond to China. If the world stands up on certain principles and values, as this is how we want you to deal with us, and accordingly China will modify and deal with you. And if you don't stand up, and obviously if you submit, and that's China would want and like, and accordingly deal with you that way. So what China becomes is dependent on us. As far as Tibetans are concerned, because we have dealt with Chinese or China for hundreds of years, we have lived side by side, we are not that anxious, as it seems, as the rest of the world in how to deal with China. We have always dealt with them before. Several times they have invaded us, and one or two times we have invaded them also. And we have lived side by side. We know kind of pretty well what kind of people they are. Given a choice, they are pretty nice people. We can get along with. Sometimes they are not so nice, and this part of the history, they are not so nice, at least Chinese leadership. So we want to change that. So I think these are the views, actually, if you keep in mind and have discussion among your friends and family members, and in community at large, will go a long way. Because what Australia does will be noted by other countries as well. What the Australian foreign minister or prime minister say will be noted by other leaders as well. So in that sense, I think this kind of discourse might be helpful to Australia and people here. And do remain engaged. And when His Holiness comes in June next year, be there and continue to be our friends if you want to. If not, it's all right. As you say in Australia, no worries.
Okay, while we wait for a question from the floor. Okay.
I'd like to ask how optimistic you are about the prospect for in China as the grassroots movement, but as a nationalised population. You see real movement there that could bring about change in the Chinese attitudes
Prospect of democracy in China. Yes, now they're increasing the volume. Prospect of democracy in China. I do think actually democracy, not just in China, but generally in the world actually, will prevail. Because the universality of democracy is being established now. Because Christianity and democracy have always been compatible. Hinduism and democracy also are compatible. That's why you see democracy in India. And Judaism as well. And there was a huge debate about Islam and democracy. They are not compatible. Now it's proven beyond doubt that Islam and democracy are also compatible. Now the question before is whether Confucianism is compatible with democracy or not. If China is a Confucius state. If that is the case, then if you look at Korea, it historically happens to be a Confucius state. It is democratic. In Taiwan, partly, and it is also democratic. So Confucianism and democracy are also compatible. And what you see in China actually is very interesting. On the one hand, you have communism, or rather Karl Marx is there, on the basis of one-party system. And same with Adam Smith is also there because there's a market economy. And Mr. Confucius is also there because there's Confucius element. And Buddha is also there because the largest religion in China is Buddhism. Officially 200 million are Buddhists, and some say even 300 million are Buddhists. So if there is Karl Marx, Adam Smith, Buddha and Confucius in one room, that is in China, I'm sure Mr. Democracy will also knock the door soon. Thank you.
I would like to know the dialogue between the Chinese government and the actual Tibetan actual government has been stopped for years. And will you restart the dialogue again? And if so, what are you preparing to do?
Dialogue between the Chinese government and Tibet administration. It all started in the late 70s, early 80s, and then continued till January 2010. Because I did mention the Tibetan spirit and Tibetan solidarity is strong. One example, during the Cultural Revolution and before that, many Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed, and Cultural Revolution was essentially against four orders: old Tibetan tradition, old culture, and all that. It was a kind of a declared war. And Tibetans were made to wear Mao suit, not speak Tibetan, not follow Tibetan culture. By mid-70s, the Chinese government thought, at least the Communist Party thought, well, Tibetans have been assimilated now, ideologically and culturally, so they have become more or less like Chinese. And then Deng Xiaoping opened the door, and the Tibetan delegation first came to Tibet. A couple of them came, and that was how the relationship developed. Chinese government or Chinese leaders were so convinced that Tibetans are no more Tibetans but Chinese, that Tibetan villagers were warned, when the exiled Tibetans come to Lhasa and other places, don't be nasty at them, don't throw stones at them, if possible be polite. When Tibetans from exile came, first thing Tibetans did was mock them, because they said they are Dalai Lama's people. They are blessed by Dalai Lama. The sense of solidarity, the Tibetan spirit was so strong, even after a decade or two of very, very controlled environment, where they tried everything by essentially physically destroying monasteries and nunneries, by discouraging and banning Tibetan culture, Tibetan language. Even then, it revived very quickly. And among the first things Tibetans did was build monasteries and nunneries in Tibet. So the Tibetan spirit is very strong. Now to move forward from 2002 to January 2010, envoys of His Holiness the Dalai Lama met the Chinese counterpart 9 times So between the envoys and the Chinese counterpart, they have had 9 rounds of dialogue. So we have had discussions. And in 2008, we put in writing, in the form of memorandum of genuine autonomy to the Chinese government as to what we mean by genuine autonomy. Genuine autonomy within China, within the framework of the Chinese constitution. That's how we define it. And we put it on the paper. It's available on websites. And Chinese government alleged that no, this is not for genuine autonomy. There is a hidden independence element. And then to explain the genuine autonomy, we added another note in 2010. Unfortunately, the Chinese government did not respond in kind. And recently, 2 envoys of the Solemnist Dialogue resigned out of utter frustration because there was lack of positive response from January 2010 till now. For 2.5 years, there has not been any meeting. Having said that, with the new leadership coming by November or December, we hope the Chinese government will realize that their hardline policies in Tibet has failed, and they will review their policy and re-engage to find a mutually acceptable solution to a peaceful way. We have invested in democracy and non-violence. We will continue to invest in democracy and non-violence. If you believe in non-violence, the dialogue is the way forward. So we remain ready to engage in dialogue with the Chinese government to solve the issue of Tibet. So this is the state of dialogue. Thank you.
Prime Minister, firstly I'd like to thank you for coming to talk to us in Sydney. This is something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I had the pleasure of going to Tibet about 2 years ago, and I must say that I was deeply touched by the situation there. It seems to my ignorant eyes that part of the Chinese strategy with dealing with Tibet relations is to assimilate Tibetan and Chinese culture. The question I have for you is, what is your strategy for ensuring the long-term of Tibetan culture?
You're right. Actually, assimilation has been a policy since imperial times, actually, thousand years ago. If you watch the movie Songs in Tibet, Tibetan songs or songs. There is a movie by Ngawang Chumbela. He went to Tibet and documented folk song as well as new song, and for which he was arrested and put behind bars. I think he spent 6 or 7 years. 7 years in prison, and he got released with supporters like you and around the world asking for his release. And finally, he managed to come out, and we made a documentary. If you watch that movie, it's very clear how assimilation is so systematic and so sophisticated. In fact, Mao Zedong reportedly said in that movie, he's quoted as saying, a song is more powerful than 1,000 army to conquering land, conquering people, something like that. I'm just paraphrasing. So it's true. You can see the songs from Tibet that comes out, at least recently, tend to be more Chinese in a sense. The way they dance, movements, dress, everything. But now there's a revival of traditional folk songs and traditional way of singing. And recently, some artists have put songs. Actually, you can see, watch in YouTube, songs in praise of the Solemnist Dialogue, and to show support to me, not as an individual, but for the position that I hold. Songs in praise of me also, saying, "Oh, we have your support. You have to be brave." There's a song like, "We have a golden throne for Solemnist. We have silver throne for Lobsang Sangay." These are songs by artists inside Tibet. They are sending a message to Tibetans outside and the international community that our heart and mind and support is with the Tibetan administration down south. They are not singing for me as an individual, for the position that I hold, for the symbol that I represent. So there is a conscious, deliberate efforts on the part of Chinese government. Intermarriages were also encouraged. But that is not working actually. Very few Tibetans marry Chinese. And Tibetan language as the medium of instruction is not allowed at university level. It's not allowed at high school level, even middle school level, but in primary school level, Tibetan language is used, but that is also nowadays discouraged. So Chinese as the medium of instruction, and if you go, as you said, we went to Tibet, and if you see any signboard of offices or shops, there's a big Chinese character and a small Tibetan character. That also came about because Tibetans complained, but then essentially you can see systematically trying to assimilate, discourage, and dilute Tibetan culture, thereby undermining Tibetan identity. Having said that, there is also an effort on the part of Tibetan people to wear Tibetan, eat Tibetan, speak Tibetan every Wednesday. The Hakka movement is also going on by the Tibetan people voluntarily. And the political activism in Tibet is very, very high. In that sense, assertion of Tibetan identity also is going very strong. In that, one could make an argument that assertion of Tibetan identity in historical context is almost at its highest. Because nowadays, younger generation or older generation, Tibetan inside and outside, we feel we are Tibetan, and that we ought to have our freedom.
I'd like to read some Twitter comments. Fiona Byrne at Fiona_Greens. Fiona said, Tibetan Burman exile is a test model that other refugee groups around the world may be able to adapt for themselves. And then Fiona Byrne made another comment saying, Kalon Tripa suggested to all politicians perhaps they would share transport with their opponents like it did in India. Now, someone watching the online talk sent a Twitter question. Kalon Tripa, what's your plan for gender equality in Tibet?
Well, I'm being introduced and moderated by Kinzumla. Of the 6 colors that we have in the cabinet, 2 are women. So that's a fairly good representation. I would like to make an argument. And most importantly, the Home Department and the Foreign Department are led by women. In the sense, the face of the Tibetan movement is also women, and the home is also taken care of by women. So I've given, and these 2 departments are also the largest department in the Tibetan administration. So I do think I've given fair representation, and I have accepted and tolerated Kinzumla's dissent to Sri all these days without any complaints. I do agree that gender equality is very important, and I try not only make the point, but by appointing 2 women in the Kashak of 6 members, in a way it's a demonstration. And then in the Tibetan administration itself, in Dharamsala, the Kanki, at central level, the women representation among staff is around 33 or 4%. Not that bad. But in the settlements level actually in the government and the cooperative, the women representation is still less. So we have work cut off for us, and we will keep doing it. And if there are some women volunteers, especially Tibetans, now we have Tibet Forum, where Tibetans can volunteer and come to Dharamsala and work for 3 months, 6 months. We are open to that. In fact, 2 first volunteers who came to Dharamsala, and one is working, one is just there. One is an accounting specialist, and other is legal trained. Both of them happen to be women, so we welcome them.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for your talk and your presence in Sydney. I hope and pray that you will become a Tibetan image of Barack Obama. My question is in 2 parts, and I will be very brief. The first is that a number of parliaments around the world have passed resolutions of support to Tibet and Tibetan people and their plight. and His Holiness the Dalai Lama has met over many years many governors, prime ministers and presidents. Actually, he has outlived a number of them in office. But the sad part of it is that this political statement in the parliament not always translates into practical action by governments. I would like you to comment on that. And the second thing is, I hope that's not too sensitive. If it is, you can ignore my question. Do you have a view on boycotting Chinese products?
Sensitive question, I'm thick-skinned. Every visit, for example, I'm here, it's in the news report that Foreign Minister Bob Carr is not meeting me, it's being widely reported. But as I was having a reception this evening, actually, someone was telling me, oh, it must be very, what was the word, daunting or embarrassing or something like that to me. I said, no. I said, as in Australia says, no worries. We meet those who want to meet, and we don't complain about those who don't want to meet. Because given a choice, we want to believe. That's where I think Buddhism comes in. Given a choice, people would like to meet and discuss things. But it's only fair that you hear from both sides, then make a judgment and a statement. In that sense, Australian leaders, it's important for them to meet with their Holiness and hear what Tibetans have to say. After all, it's a Tibetan issue, a Tibetan people's issue. So you can listen to Chinese leaders, which they can rightfully do so and should, but also meet the other leaders. So, statement of concern helps. Resolution in the Parliament also helps. That's why this US Senate passed a resolution 7 months ago, unanimously, after 20 plus years. European Parliament passed a resolution. In fact, the members of the Japanese Parliament issued a declaration on the issue of Tibet. All these are welcome gestures. Even the Italian Parliament passed a resolution. So all these are messages of hope to Tibetans inside Tibet, also a message to the Chinese government that Tibet issue is here. Now, statements and resolutions are very much welcome, but action obviously is more important. And on that front, obviously, we urge respective governments to take action. And then the Honourable Bob Carr, the Foreign Minister of Australia, suggested, which I think is a good idea, that he would like to see the Australian diplomats go to Tibetan areas to assess the situation, why certain conditions taking place, what are the conditions. That should take place. And Australian members of Parliament to go to Tibet to assess the situation. All these are, a stepping stone towards the larger goal of restoring freedom for Tibetans. Having said that, yes, given a choice, do we like to have more concrete action from the respective governments? We do. But only Tibetans can do only so much. We can appeal. And the constituents can request their governments to take action, and I hope you all will do so. As for Chinese products, well, everywhere you go, you see made in China. It's not only difficult to ignore, but even if you close your eyes, I think something you will see. You close your eyes everywhere. It's a difficult proposition. I know some Tibetans who advocate that, but I leave it to your individual choice what to do about it. Because again, as I said, some Tibetans don't like when we say this, but Tibet administration is concerned. Our movement is not against China as a country or Chinese people. Our movement is against, if at all, is against the Chinese government's heartland policies. If that ends, and historically we have had, as I said, live side by side peacefully, we can live side by side peacefully. Thanks.
My question relates to the status of the Tibetan government in exile in India. Obviously, it wouldn't be able to operate if it wasn't for the long-standing generosity of India, also in hosting thousands of Tibetan refugees that continue to flow across the border. I'm wondering how you view that relationship long-term between India and China. And I work with a number of Tibetan refugees who've come from India recently, and I know that in the last few years there are a lot of demonstrations in Delhi, and Tibetan refugees who were involved in that have had some problems with the Indian authority and also the identity movement. So I guess my question is two-pronged. How do you view the long-term relationship between India and China? How does that affect Tibetan refugees in India?
Of course, no one can predict what will happen in the future, but as far as Indian government is concerned, Indian people are concerned, they have been the most generous to Tibetans. They have been the most supportive of Tibetan people. Largest number of Tibetans are in India. Tibetan administration is based in India. So for the last 50 years, they have been a really, really good host. Of course, we have some issues from time to time, Tibetan youth, Indian youth, at local level. Issues are bound to come. We all human beings, even in family, we have issues. So that way, we are really utterly grateful to India and people of India, and also people of Himachal Pradesh, because that's where Dharamsala is in Tibetan administration. Yes, when some Tibetan youth protest, sometimes they are arrested, and sometimes they are put behind detention. But then, because India also has rule of law, unless you ask permission, you are not supposed to protest. And if you protest without asking permission, they will come and arrest you, like they might do here as well. So these are, there are some lines, sometimes we Tibetan cross, sometimes there are lines, sometimes Indian authorities, policemen cross. These are bound to happen, but overall, I think India and Indian people have been very, very supportive of the Tibetan people, and which we hope and believe it will remain so for many, many years to come. Because Tibet and India have long history. Tibetan Buddhism was transported or borrowed from India. So in that sense, when we talk about preserving Buddhist civilization, actually it's in a way from India, Indian civilization. And as I just mentioned, Tibetan democracy is also borrowed from Indian democracy. And non-violence, as I said, it's an uncompromising principle that we have. It's also ahimsa borrowed from the Mahatma Gandhi. Sometimes I jokingly tell all my Indian friends, by the way, Tibetan movement is made in India, so you better support it. Now that I'm also born and brought up in India, so the Tibetan political leader is also born and brought up and made in India. So wholly, it's a whole package. And I said, if you fail, in a way India failed. If you succeed, in a way India succeeds. So you better be with us. And they have been with us, and I think they will remain with us. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm late. I just wanted to say it was riveting watching you in Canberra at the National Press Club, and very moving, and quite contrasting what was going on in Australia at the time. I just wanted to ask you, as Minister for Education, with so few children or less children and refugees being able to escape from Tibet, perhaps this is an opportunity, and I know that everybody works incredibly hard in India, in the schools, in the training schools and so forth. What sort of changes do you see happening in education? What has actually occurred in the last 50 years has been really quite mind-blowing. And now you've got a lot of professionals coming through, dentists, and I don't know if you've got surgeons yet, but certainly you have a road scholar, you tend to surgeon, a very intelligent young woman from America. What do you see the changes that are timely in education in India, and how will they prepare people for going back or going to the West?
I also hold the portfolio of education, so that's an education-related question. Education, the Tibetan administration consider it as the #1 priority. We have declared it mainly because a couple of reasons. One, if you look at any successful community, be Jewish, Armenian, Japanese after Second World War in Australia, they have always invested in education, because education is one thing that can break the cycle of poverty, of illiteracy, of empowerment. And myself included, as I mentioned, I grew up in a humble background. I'm standing up. I think some of the Tibetans voted for me because they thought I had a bit of education. They'll be sorely disappointed after meeting me, I'm pretty sure, tomorrow. But And then I just feel from where I grew up, I think if other Tibetans could have similar opportunity, and that would be good. So by saying the education is #1 priority, it's not that we are able to create magically. What we are trying to do is set the standards, inspire people, set their goals, and put the prestige of the Kashak, of our administration in education, and thereby sending a message to the Tibetan community at large. Education is #1 priority, and it will remain so for 5 years. So all of you, whatever we have in our capacity, engage in it and do the best we can. Ultimately, it's a collective effort. Administration can do so far, and we will do. We will provide scholarship. We will try to encourage, if not surgeon, at least MBBS, engineers, things like that. We will encourage them. We will try to facilitate some positions and scholarship abroad. We'll try. And if anyone from here would like to bring a student or two to Australia, rather send me an email. I'll send a couple of children here. So we will try that. And then it's timely in the sense, there is a sense in the Tibetan community that we have invested in many priorities before, in the settlement, in health, and finance, and all that. But certainly education seems to be the focus. And that's why we've been saying it's a collective effort. Everybody has to get engaged and participate in it. If parents don't pay attention to children, then no matter what kind of facilities one can provide for one have, doesn't matter. If the society as a whole collectively don't engage and create the environment where education is #1 priority, then it might be diluted and efforts might not be able. So teachers have to take responsibility. Administrators have to take responsibility. So everybody has to be engaged. So we are trying to introduce certain rules, regulations. I've called for the meetings of all the principals, teachers. Those things we are doing. Those things we are doing, and we want to do more. And hopefully, that's what we hope, that we will have plenty of Tibetan professionals, far more educated than me, far more talented than me, far more sophisticated than, and which I see happening. Because we had this Tibetan professionals meeting in New York, upstate New York, 2 years ago, and 150 of them came. And where I found that some people are working in the White House, State Department, NASA, some scientists, potential scientists, in the 20s. They're getting really good education at Ivy League, and even here in Australia, I was really encouraged in Canberra. They are doing professional degrees now. They're not enough, they're not satisfied with college degrees, they're doing professional degrees. So with investment in education, if all of us invest and work hard, and some Tibetan youth here pursue more degrees, better degrees, then I think if we have really full of talented Tibetans all around the world, we can look after our parents pretty well, buy ourselves things we want to buy, always the biggest, self-interest matters. Then you can serve the Tibetan community and the movement far more effectively than others. In that sense, education is our #1 priority, where we ought to invest collectively, and we will continue to do so. Thank you.
We'll take the last question,
When we talk about Tibet as a country, the general impression one gets, especially in the Western countries, is that of Buddhism. My question is, or my request to you is, would you speak a bit about the diversity of religious practices that we have in the Tibetan community, and what its significance, particularly from the point on historical on Tibetan history?
I've already announced that I'm not an expert in Buddhism, but here's the question. I will not commit sins answering this question. But yes, look at the history of Tibet and religion. Indigenous religion was first, then Buddhism came to Tibet in 7th, 8th century, and now that's the school we call Nyingma. I mean, very simplistic here. And then the Kajuk, Sakya, and Gelug. So we have 4 Buddhist sects and 1 indigenous religion, 5. And Gelug also is the largest actually, but in the Tibetan parliament, our representations in the parliament, 2 each sits for all the parliaments. So religion has played a very important role in the Tibetan civilization, but also in next barbarian sense, there's a bit of conflicts when one sect kind of ruled Tibet after another. So we have also past history, and I see some people from different sanghas here, some sanghas, and I hope you will take a Buddhist teaching, and as you are here, interested in the general Tibetan cause, and remain engaged in and participate in Tibetan cause. Also, I just want to, the important point I want to make is also Tibet is not just as a Buddhist civilization, but Tibet is vitally important as far as environment is concerned. So to share, and military, geopolitically also. The whole thing, the invasion of Tibet happened as part of the great game during the 19th and 20th century. By great game, I mean Russia, British India, and China were interested in Afghanistan, Tibet, and Xinjiang. They felt that these areas were geopolitically very important, because if you look at the map of Asia, you will see Afghanistan, Tibet, and Xinjiang. If you are in any one of these countries, you can look at South Asia, you can look at Central Asia, you can connect with East Asia also, in that sense, with China. So geopolitically vitally important. So what you see in Afghanistan, unfortunately, is a continuation of the same legacy of the Great Game. And that's what you see in Tibet also, in Xinjiang also. So that's why there's a military build-up in Tibet. 5 major airfields are already built in Tibet. 23 or 4 military divisions are in Tibet, compared to 11 or 12 from the Indian side. Railway lines already up to Lhasa. They're expanding into the borders of India. Highways are already built. Ningxi, Congo area, which is 50 kilometers from India. They're building airfields as well as there's already a highway. They're developing that area. So military build-up is huge. In that sense, the future of Asia is at stake. Environmentally, Tibet is vitally important. You might have read that Tibet is also called the third pole, because after Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the third highest reserve of ice. Unlike Antarctica and Arctic, when ice melts, it goes to ocean, but it remains frozen generally. The snow-capped mountains of Tibet, when the ice or the snow melts, it becomes fresh water to 10 major rivers of Asia. Indus River from Tibet, it goes to India to Pakistan. You often read in newspaper there's a dispute between India and Pakistan about distribution of the water, Indus River. Brahmaputra River, one of the largest and most famous river in Asia, it flows from Tibet to India to Bangladesh. And Salween and Mekong River. Mekong River, very famous in Vietnam War. It starts from Tibet, goes all the way to Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma also. And Yangtze River and Yellow River. Yangtze River, the Yangtze Dam that we all have read. Yellow River, the source or the basis of Chinese civilization, starts from Tibet. So Tibet is a source of 10 major rivers. Now, when Tibet was free, as the natural guardian or the steward of Tibet's environment, we respected, as per Buddhist principles, the natural flow of rivers. We shared water. There was no sharing issue as such. Now, the Chinese companies trying to make quick money, they are building dams, not just one dam, up to 20 dams per river, thereby affecting the natural flow of river, thereby affecting the lives and livelihood of millions of people downstream. Because many people on the side of the river, they base their livelihood on fishery or agriculture, both for which water is very important. And when you start damming it, now, because it looks like many of these dams are built unscientifically, engineering incorrect, environmental unsound. When it cracks or breaks, it will have a devastating effect people downstream. So in that sense, Tibet's environment is very important. That's why water is called white gold nowadays, because some experts say the wars were fought over land before, wars are fought over energy now, the wars will be fought over water. Tibet has plenty, unfortunately, not under our control. Hence, restoring Tibet's traditional role as the steward of Tibet's environment, I think, is vital for the future of Asia, for the peace in Asia. And also, some experts say the jet stream over Tibet affects the climate all the way to Peru. Most likely, it affects the climate in Australia too. So Tibet, given it's called the roof of the world, given its height and the snow-capped mountains, is vital for the rest of the world. So Tibet also has a lot of mineral resources: gold, copper, uranium, borax, and the second largest mining in Asia is in Tibet. So huge amount of natural resources. And pristine forests of Tibet has been cut into half, thereby leading to landslides. Landslides lead to silting. Silting causing riverbed rise. Riverbed rises, then it creates flood. And then we see now, in summer you often read 1/3 of Bangladesh is underwater. Then it has a major linkage to deforestation that is taking place in Tibet. So Tibet is vitally important from Buddhist point of view, environmental point of view, geopolitical point of view, and political point of view, in the sense we have invested in democracy and nonviolence. These are the principles generally subscribed to and supported by the international community around the world. In that sense, I think it's vital that we succeed.
I'd like to read a Twitter comment before posing the final question. Joshua Manning, he commented on Twitter, refreshing to hear a political leader separate the actions of an administration from the people living under that administration. Now, the final question is one of the most popular questions on our online poll, and that is on the emulations. Do the self-emulations mark a new phase in the Tibetan struggle? What are we to make of them?
New phase, perhaps one could say so. It's a little early, but what it reflects is how unbearable the system and the situation is in Tibet. That's why, given a choice, no one would commit self-emulation. But Tibetans are doing so. That form of protest has happened because the Chinese government refused to enter into dialogue to solve the issue of Tibet peacefully. Now, what we're seeking is genuine autonomy. I just want to make a broader comment here. Interestingly, when you leave this room and if you meet some Chinese tomorrow, if you have discussion and say, why can't Tibetans have autonomy, like Hong Kong? One country, two system. Immediately the Chinese response will be, at least most of them will say, well, Hong Kong already had a British commercial system and legal system, so granting one country system was recognition of that reality. But then, what they will not tell you, and which you should remind, is that what about Macau? Macau didn't have a commercial system or a legal system. In fact, Macau was a crime-infested island before the transfer. All the criminals from China fled to Macau. And if there was an economy, there was an underground economy, but there was no above-board kind of economy. But still, Macau was granted autonomy. Why? Now the Chinese government says they are willing to recognize the status quo of Taiwan or grant a high degree of autonomy to Taiwan, as long as there is one China and two interpretations of different territories. Now they have already granted autonomy to Macau and to Hong Kong and Macau, and they are willing to recognize the status quo of Taiwan. Why not to Tibetans? There's not a constitutional issue or an institutional issue. If there is already, as per Constitution of China, it allows that. It's also not a lack of political will, because they have the political will to solve the issue of Taiwan. They insist they want to solve the issue of Tibet, Taiwan. Why not Tibet? Is this a racial issue? What Chinese government essentially telling Tibetans is that they are Chinese, at least in their eyes. If you are not Chinese, that's why we don't trust you, we will not give you autonomy. In that sense, solving the issue of Tibet could be a catalyst for bigger transformation within China, and it might help the future of Asia as well. Because till when China grants autonomy to Tibetans, it is the beginning of acceptance of diversity. It is the beginning of acceptance that yes, we can trust someone different than us, we can grant autonomy to someone different than us. This diversity is very, very important. But historically, if you read any Chinese text, Dongguo, mainland China, Dongguo means Middle Kingdom. On the basis of Dongguo, the Middle Kingdom, rest around China are all barbarians. They are in the middle of the world, and people outside of the middle of the world are all barbarians. Hence, Tibetans are barbarians. That's why they have to be liberalized. They have to be civilized. And that's why they say, oh, Tibetans were liberated and civilized in the 1950s. Because they were dirty, filthy slaves, and we cleaned them up. Now they are civilized. But, unfortunately, people who live beyond Tibet are also barbarians, because only Chinese are the Middle Kingdom. So thereby, by extension, Australians, all of you are also barbarians. Now here is the issue. That's a philosophical or historical foundation of Dongguo, the Middle Kingdom. Hence they are willing to grant autonomy to Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, because why? They are part of the Dongguo, they are the Middle Kingdom people. Till they agree to grant autonomy to barbarians, they have not accepted diversity. They have not accepted respect for others. And if Tibet is granted autonomy, thereby they have recognized diversity and respect for others, which means by extension, they will also respect the rest of the world, including Australia. So that is why Tibet could be a catalyst for real changes in China, and which will affect the future of Asia. That's why I said what happens to China will be partly determined by how the world, Asia and Australia stands up to China. In that sense, the basic values of Australia, freedom, justice, democracy, human rights, have to be advocated and made known to China through your leaders. And I hope you will do so. That will help me a bit in my day-to-day life. As I said, my job is tough, and after taking over, it's a lot tougher. Now, let me end with a small anecdote of His Holiness. On August 8th, the day of my inauguration, let me add a lighter note so that you all don't go heavy and depressed. Oh, I listened to that Tibetan. Don't talk about it. I need whiskey or something. But I'll end with a lighter note. In the news media, it's reported that officially Bob Carr refused to meet me, which is fine with me. As I said, we meet those who want to meet, and don't complain about those who don't want to meet. No worries. So there was no official appointment, but there was karmic appointment. Now, how did this karmic appointment happen? Wednesday is a good day for Tibetans because that's when His Holiness Dalai Lama was born. Mine also a good day as per my lunar calendar, as per my horoscope. So Wednesday morning, we were going towards the Australian Parliament in Canberra. Some of us were going towards, and we didn't get a parking spot. And I said, stop the car, we'll walk. We walked and we entered, waited the elevator. Elevator door opened. They said it's going down. Okay. Then it comes up. Door opened again. Two women with a cart. And Honorable Michael Danby suggested two women, could you come out so that we can enter because we were getting late for the appointment. They obliged and they came out. Surely we all entered the elevator, went to the first floor, door opened. Who was waiting? Honorable Bob Cup. Then I was thinking that, here's Tibetan Kalon Tripa. They looked at me and said, how do you do? I said, fine, thank you. How are you? I said, fine. Shortest appointment ever. Now, the whole day we met. We met with some 40-some members of the parliament. They were very kind, very generous, exchanged ideas, in-depth discussion. And met the president of the Green Party and all that. At the end of the day, I said, it was a good meeting, whole day went very well. Now let's walk towards the elevator to the parking lot. And as we walked towards the elevator, who was coming from the other side? Honorable Prime Minister Julia. And I said, hey, someone ought to introduce now, you see. And the staff member Jane, she said, no, I'm not that bold enough. So you're on your own. Then someone ran past us. Someone ran and whispered something to Julia. And she looked down a bit and she looked straight and walked past us. And maybe he was the chief of staff. I think what he did was he said, hey, Tibetan Kalon was there. So I got introduced. It's all right. So despite the lack of official appointment, I had karmic appointment here in Canberra, which is a good thing. Now, the final note, why I need your help. Because on August 8th, the day of my inauguration, His Holiness came and gave a very moving speech. Very moving. That quote is still, remembered by Tibetans all around the world. When he was young, the political authority was handed over to him, and today I'm handing it over to young, democratic elected Tibetan leader. This has been his long cherished goal. That's what he said. So, and after a few days' time, he gave interviews, and if you read this interview, he often says this. Oh, on August 8th, that night, I had a very unusual sleep. That's what he says. 9 hours of sleep and no dream. That means his long wish was fulfilled. And since that day, it seems he sleeps very well. But my sleep pattern is changed. So I had to sleep well. And so be with Tibetan people. And more I get good news from Australia, I'll sleep better and better. And then I'll have more normal life. So till then, goodbye and good luck. And be with us. If not, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you, Tripa, and thank you everyone for coming along to hear directly from the political leader of the Tibetan people. We have an information stall at the door, so please, if you are not on the 83 mailing list, please sign up, become a member, and if you can, please make a monthly donation, a small donation, which will go a long way in supporting the political work in Australia. And I would like to thank the volunteers tonight who have helped us in putting this together. And finally, Kalon Tripa, spending the last 1 week with you, you have, everyone you have met, you have given a lot of optimism and conviction in our struggle, and personally, it has been a very inspiring journey. So on behalf of Australian Tibet Council, I would like to thank you once again for sharing your journey, your vision, your thoughts, and your beliefs. Thank you once again, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much. I met your predecessor. Is that so? Venerable Sandoni Poche. I don't look like you.